We're going to go back into public session now. And we are in public session, members. Before we begin, I want to bring to attention a note on privilege, as I do at the top of every public meeting. Witnesses giving evidence from within the parliamentary precincts here in Leinster House are granted by absolute privilege in respect to the evidence they give to a committee. This means that a witness has a full defence in any defamation action for anything said at a committee meeting. However, witnesses are expected not to abuse this privilege and may be directed to cease giving evidence on an issue of my direction. Witnesses should follow the direction of the Chair in this regard and are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that, as is reasonable, no adverse commentary should be made against an identifiable third person or entity. Witnesses who are to give evidence from a location outside the parliamentary precincts, although I don't think this arises today, are asked to note that they may not benefit from the same level of immunity from legal proceedings. As a witness giving evidence from within the parliamentary precincts, I may consider it appropriate to take legal advice on this matter. Privilege against defamation does not apply to the publication by you outside of the proceedings held by the committee of any matters arising from the proceedings. Members, I'd like to also advise you of the constitutional requirements that members must be physically present within the confines of Leinster House complex in order to participate in public meetings. I will not permit a member to participate where they are not adhering to this constitutional requirement. Therefore, a member who attempts to participate from outside the precincts will be asked to leave the meeting. In this regard, I would ask any member partaking via Microsoft Teams, we don't have any at the moment, but that could change, that prior to making their contribution to the meeting, you confirm that you are in fact on the grounds of Leinster House campus. You're reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice that you should not criticise or make charges against any person or entity by name or in such a way as to make him, her or it identifiable or otherwise engage in speech that might be regarded as damaging to the good name of the person or entity. Therefore, if your statements are potentially defamatory in relation to an identifiable person or entity, you will be directed to discontinue your remarks, and it's imperative that you comply with any such direction that that's made from the Chair. The agenda for today's meeting is engagement with the Sea Fisheries Protection Authority. To provide just a little bit of context to this topic, this is part of a series of meetings that this committee is undertaking with regards to sea fisheries protection. We have previously heard from representative organisations of the seafood and fishing industries, and the committee has commissioned a significant piece of research comparing the various fisheries protection regimes in operation across the continent of Europe, primarily within the European Union and also by British authorities. And the committee has further appointed Deputy Padraig McLaughlin as rapporteur. So Deputy McLaughlin will be preparing and bringing a report based on today's discussion and indeed discussions at previous meetings, and drawing on that research that the committee has commissioned. So that is the context, and today we'll hear from witnesses representing the Sea Fisheries Protection Authority. And Dafir Falterov, you're very, very welcome to the committee. We're looking forward to a very positive engagement, no doubt a forthright one, but I think a good one that will be interesting for all our members, indeed many of those who are watching and following the work of the committee. We have Mr. Pascal Hayes, Executive Chairperson of the SFPA, Mr. Michael Finn, Senior Executive Manager for Operations and Authority Member, Ms. Louise Murphy, Senior Executive Manager for Corporate Services and Director of Finance, and Mr. Barry Murphy, Executive Manager for Legal Services. And the format for the meeting today will be that we will take the opening statement, which has been forwarded to members, but we'll take 5 minutes to allow you to read that into the record or give a synopsis of it as you prefer, and then we'll go to questions and answers, and it'll be 7-minute slots. And hopefully we'll get a second round in, but I would just remind members that 7 minutes has to include time for both your question and indeed the responses from the witnesses. So just to bear that in mind, there are 4 clocks under the screens around here. They'll be counting down initially for the 5 minutes for the opening statement, and then for each 7-minute tranche they will be counting down as well. So I just ask members and witnesses to bear that in mind. So thank you for being here. You're very welcome, and I will invite you now to give your opening statement.
Good morning, Chairman and committee members. I'd like to thank the committee for your invite to appear here today. We welcome interest in the role of the SFPA, in particular our work as a regulator for the sea fisheries and seafood sectors, and to have an opportunity to outline how we seek to ensure effective and fair regulation of the areas under the authority's mandate to support safe, authentic and sustainable seafood. I'm joined today by Mr. Michael Finn, Ms. Louise Murphy and Mr. Barry Murphy. Effective regulation and oversight of the sea fisheries and seafood sectors is essential to the achievement of our shared ambitions for the development of Ireland's seafood sector, as well as ensuring that Ireland's shared marine resources are sustainable for future generations of fishermen and fisherwomen, coastal communities and Irish and international consumers. The SFPA plays a key role in promoting compliance, verifying it, and where necessary using the powers provided under legislation to enforce sea fisheries and seafood safety laws for all areas under our remit. This includes all seafood produced in Ireland's seafood processing companies, all fishing vessels operating within Ireland's 200-mile limit, and almost 2,000 Irish registered fishing vessels wherever they operate. The SFPA's scope of work is broad and varied. In total, the SFPA has 191 employees, with 88 of these being of the grade of Sea Fisheries Protection Officer, with a further 9 senior port officers based at key locations around the country, predominantly in the major fishing ports. This enables our organisation to fulfil our statutory requirements as laid down in the Sea Fisheries and Maritime Jurisdiction Act 2006, several of which include direct interaction with the sea fisheries and seafood sectors, including official controls of seafood processing establishment and of aquaculture production sites and wild shellfish fisheries, regulation of the commercial sea fishing industry and verifying compliance with the EU Common Fisheries Policy, seafood trade supports and controls, including the provision of catch and health certification for exports and the application of seafood import controls, and promotion of compliance across the seafood sector. Our Strategic Plan 2024-26 focuses on 3 core areas, namely the protection of sea fisheries and seafood safety, organisational excellence and communication and engagement. In line with wider government and public service strategy, we are advancing organisational efficiency through best-in-class support for staff, processes, systems and data. We have embarked on an ambitious programme of digitalisation, which aims to enable us to optimally deliver on our mandate as a regulator. In line with our strategy, we have worked to enhance our position as an effective regulator, an employer of choice, an active participant in Ireland's climate action journey, and an important stakeholder in our global food production ecosystem. To give some context as to the importance of the fishing and seafood sector to Ireland, the total GDP of the Irish seafood sector in 2024 was €1.24 billion, with just under 17,000 livelihoods dependent on the sector, most of which are in coastal communities around Ireland. Over the past 6 decades, the consumption of fish per capita has tripled, with an average of 22 kilograms now being consumed annually. Ireland has an excellent reputation as a high-quality producer of seafood, and the SFPA plays an important role in maintaining this reputation with robust monitoring and inspection programmes in place. For this area of our remit, we operate under a service contract with the FSAI. Under this contract, the SFPA is tasked with approving seafood processing establishment, including fishing vessels that freeze and/or process on board, and the implementation of an inspection programme in line with the risk assessment associated with the processing activity, size and compliance history of the establishment. At the present time, there are 182 approved establishments, 49 Irish registered fishing vessels approved to freeze on board, and 1 Irish registered factory vessel. Samples of products are taken for analysis in line with the regulatory limits, and where samples are found to be outside of acceptable limits, follow-up action, including the withdrawal and recall of product, may be necessary. Protecting seafood is critical not only to the reputation of Ireland's seafood offering both at home and abroad, but ultimately for the health and well-being of consumers of Irish seafood products. In 2024, the SFPA promoted and oversaw compliance with relevant food safety legislation in 2,290 food businesses. Overall, a total of 2,593 food safety controls were carried out. Of these official controls, 476 were categorised as inspections of approved establishments. 1,965 consisted of official check controls, such as checks prior to certifying a consignment of food being exported to a third country, temperature checks and labelling checks. Shellfish production and wild shellfish fisheries are a significant sector, and the SFPA is responsible for the implementation of classification and biotoxin sampling plans to ensure that the products are safe for consumption. On an annual basis, just under 1,800 samples of shellfish are taken by the SFPA for analysis by the Marine Institute. Additional phytoplankton samples and biotoxin samples are taken by the SFPA. Offshore fisheries for species such as scallops and razor clams are also required to be sampled. Much of the fresh and processed fishery products are exported from Ireland to markets in the UK, the EU and Asia predominantly. We are responsible for certifying product for export from both an IUU regulation compliance perspective.
I ask you to draw your remarks to a conclusion. You've overshot the runway by 2 minutes, so it was the chairman asked that you do a synopsis of the contribution, which we have. So sorry about that, but you may have an opportunity at a later stage.
Okay, thanks very much, Chair.
Well, it's just in conformity with what happens here. The first who was indicated is Deputy Pádraig McLaughlin, and remembering there's 7 minutes between the questions and the answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. So one of the tasks that our committee have taken on is to compare the powers, resources and so on of the SFPA with the, as best we can see, their counterparts in other European member states. That work is ongoing. We've been assisted by the Library and Research section here in the Oireachtas. But I have here the list of union inspectors per member state in the year. It's a document from this year, 2025, and Ireland has the highest number of registered inspectors, 266. France is 237. Greece 212. I'm taking it in order of size. Spain, obviously a huge coastline, same as France, 152. How do you explain the fact that Ireland has the highest number of inspectors in the European Union?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Deputy. As I said at the opening statement, Deputy, the organisation has 191 employees in total. Of those, 88 are sea fishery protection officers and 9 are senior port officers. So those 88 and those 9 are registered as union inspectors, but so are all the naval personnel that go to sea and conduct inspections at sea. So the difference between the 101 inspectors that are employees of the SFPA and the list that you're finding as union-approved inspectors can be explained by the Defence Forces personnel that are also registered.
But I don't have the exact distances in front of me, but I mean, surely that's the same for every other European member state. So in terms of designated fisheries officers, I'm sure it's the same with the Spanish Navy, the French Navy, the Greek Navy, and so on. So again, I ask you, how can you explain the fact that there's 266 registered under Ireland in this document, the highest compared to any other state?
So, Deputy, I don't know how other member states operate, whether they have that number of Defence Forces personnel, whether they have their own control authorities going to sea rather than the naval service. But the situation in Ireland is that our at-sea inspections are generally carried out by the naval service, and all the personnel that could potentially be involved in an inspection at sea are registered as union inspectors. So if the number registered is 266 and 101 are SFPA, then the difference is naval service personnel.
But you don't dispute the fact that this is an official European Commission document, that if you look at this document, the actual number of fisheries officers designated to Ireland is higher than any other European Union state?
Because, Deputy, all the naval service personnel that might conduct an inspection are registered as union inspectors.
Okay. And will you undertake to check with the other member states if it's the case that this includes Navy and their designated authority?
Well, Deputy, the other member states, how they conduct their processes under the CFP is a matter for themselves rather than for me. Okay. Ireland has chosen to use the naval service as the primary at-sea inspection service. Other member states may or may not do that.
My next question is in relation to serious concern at the recent court decision in relation to Ward Fisheries. That now has been adjudicated by the court, so it's not sub judice for our committee to deal with this. So it was 10 years before that case found its way to court, and what is deeply alarming is the case was taken under the Metrology Act, which would mean that you would lean heavily on the NSAI for taking that case. National Standards Authority of Ireland, who obviously would deal with checking weighing systems, in this case, in a fish factory. The judge, as you know, dismissed the case. No basis in evidence for taking the case. Are you going to conduct a review of everything that happened in that case, and will you publish that review?
Thanks, Deputy. The case may not be sub judice at this point in time, but in any case, I'm prohibited under statute from discussing that or any other case that has been or may be before the courts.
So the fact that the NSAI did not find any issue with the weighing system whatsoever, and that case went over 10 years, the fact that that case is referred to in a leaked audit report document to the European Union in two separate parts, officers who gave evidence in that case apparently worked in that audit, does that cause you concern?
So, Deputy, as I said, I can't comment on this. The Sea Fisheries and Maritime Jurisdiction Act 2006, Section 68, prevents me from commenting on that case or any other such case. Okay.
So you can't comment on a court case after the judge and the case has been adjudicated on? Are you appealing the case?
Do you want me to read the section, Deputy?
No, but are you appealing the case to a higher court?
I can't comment on the case, Deputy.
Okay. So you can't comment on the case. So I'm going to reiterate again, okay? You took a case over 10 years. The case was based on the Metrology Act. The NSAI, in evidence to the court, made it clear that there was absolutely no evidence of any issues with these weighing systems. And indeed, that one of your own officers may have interfered with the weighing system. I mean, it was absolutely damning, and you have no comment to make on that case?
So
you have no statements, no comments, no review, no actions taken in relation to that court case?
What I'm saying, Deputy, is that the legislation of this House prohibits me from commenting on it. But what might be useful to you is if I describe the process that's normally used in relation to cases and contraventions of regulations when we come across them in the SFPA in general terms. So if the SFPA detect a suspected non-compliance, the first thing that happens is there will be some internal checks put in place in relation to the detection. The person, the master of the vessel or whoever has been detected will be given an opportunity under cautioned interview to put forward their side of the story. A file will be completed by the Sea Fishery Protection Officer. That file will be submitted to the Director of Public Prosecutions. The Director of Public Prosecutions will determine if the case is to proceed. So there's a number of checks and balances along the way, right? And if the DPP determines there's a case to be answered, the DPP will put the case before the court. The SFPA, for a fisheries offence, does not prosecute anybody. And as far as I'm aware, has never prosecuted anybody for a fisheries offence. These cases are taken by the DPP. I'm giving you the general case of what happens here.
Yeah, but my issue here, and I'll conclude with this, Cahirla, is that the case was taken under the Metrology Act, okay? Now, that would lean heavily on the NSAI to confirm that they have found the weighing equipment to be faulty or interfered with, or, you know, that would be a very, very strong determinant factor. And, you know, it was a devastating evidence that was given. And I've looked at the court reports, and it is of profound concern to me. And I would suggest a profound concern to anybody, any fair-minded person who read the report from that case that was thrown out by the judge. It didn't even find its way to the jury. Found out, so, like, will you review taking cases under the Metrology Act that the NSAI clearly don't subscribe to, clearly have not asked you to do, clearly have not said that they have found an issue? You know, is this going to, are you going to review, I mean, are you going to take cases under the Metrology Act, even when the NSAI, who are the actual authority designated with looking at weighing devices or petrol and pump stations, that they actually work effectively, they, it's clear, did not find any wrongdoing whatsoever, yet that case was pursued under the Metrology Act, which would have relied heavily on them. I mean, are you going to review that?
So, Deputy, what I'll repeat again, I can't comment in relation to the individual case as per Section 68 of the 2006 Act, right? But the general case, I'll repeat it again, the DPP takes the cases. So the DPP prosecutes, the SFPA doesn't prosecute. There is a number of checks and balances before that process happens. The DPP is the decision maker as to whether a case proceeds or not.
Repetition. Next is Senator Jared Butler.
And thanks very much, Chair. Witnesses, I want to thank you for being here this morning and for taking the time to come in and fill us in on your role. The first question I want to ask is in relation to the depleted Navy that we now have. How has that hampered fisheries protection in the country with only one ship in the Atlantic at any given time? And I believe now there's a smaller ship in the Irish Sea. Has this impacted your role within fisheries protection in Ireland?
Thanks, Senator. And look, I guess it's common knowledge that the Naval Service have had their issues over the last number of years in relation to retention and recruitment and putting vessels to sea. So no doubt it has affected it, that's for sure. And we would like to have more assets available to us on the sea wherever they come from. But look, I mean, there's some policy decisions that come into this. Obviously, the Naval Service have other tasks besides fishery protection. Our role is not policy related. I don't want to get into those in relation to maritime security or any other competing tasking that the Naval Service may have. But we do make use of all the resource that the Naval Service has available for fisheries control. If there was more of it available, we'd make use of that as well. We also make use of the EFCA resource when it's in our EEZ. We put an SFPA inspector on board, who's also a union inspector, obviously, on board the EFCA vessel when it's in our EEZ, and the EFCA vessel conducts inspections within our EEZ and picks up as much slack as possible in circumstances where it's created by the issues that the Naval Service have had over recent years.
I'm happy to tell you I was in Grangegorman last week and there's quite a significant number of recruits coming through. The flag officer has assured me that the Naval Service has turned the corner, so I'm happy about that. One other thing, and you'll forgive my ignorance here now, it's a long time since I was anywhere near the fisheries organisations, but I recall some time ago hearing that, for example, if you're fishing for mackerel, and you land other species, those species have to be returned to the sea. And is that not gross waste of fish stock? Because by the time they're landed on the vessel, they're dead anyway.
Yeah, so I guess that situation would have pertained a number of years ago, Deputy, but due to a fairly significant campaign that was conducted at EU level, a thing called the landing obligation was brought into play, which reversed that trend of having to discard fish. So now all fish has to be landed under the landing obligation, with some exceptions, but in general they all have to be landed. And there are certain conditions in the regulations that attach to that as well.
Okay, thank you very much for your comprehensive answers, and I wish you well. Thank you, Chair.
Senator Manus-Boyle.
This is very welcome in here. Suppose the first comment I would like to say it's very disappointing to listen here today, and you know the Wards factory thing that went on for 10 years, that family went really through the ringer, and for just to come in and say you can't comment on it, I think it's just a beggar's belief, to be honest. I think people at home here is looking in on cameras and everything like this, and this is where we want to get answers, and we're not getting answers. But so it's very disappointing now, to say the same. Listen, I've been working in Killybegs 38 years. I started my life off in Campbell Seafoods, and I went then to Polar Fish. I met a lot of great friends, and I still have them today. I gained a lot of knowledge on how to handle fish and process fish. You know, but today in Killybegs is destroyed. We cannot get foreign vessels to land into the port, apart from Pelagia. That's the plant there. That's a massive employer, and the community, and they deserve all the support. Now I'm going to take us back to April, and I just want to try and get. I want to try and get clear answers here. In April 2025, a vessel with 750 tonne of blue whiting for human consumption was landed in Killybegs. Who made the decision to carry out a pierside monitor on that day, please?
Just, Deputy, in relation to your first point, I understand the disappointment, but just for clarity, Deputy, it's the legislation of this House that prevents me from commenting on a particular case. And that section says, and it refers to me attending at committees, right? And what it says is, in carrying out its duties under this section, the authority shall not, and I'm going to skip to paragraph C, be required to account to a committee to any matter which is or has been or may at a future time be the subject of proceedings before a court or tribunal in the state. So it's the legislation of this House that prevents me from commenting on it.
Well, I think the legislation needs to be changed. I mean, there's a family sat at home for 10 years and a highly pressured, their business, and we can't get answers. And I mean, that's what this committee was set up here for, was to get answers. So I just think it's very disappointing, and it's something the committee will need to look at to try and see, can we change the legislation?
And sorry, Deputy, getting on to your question about the blue whiting landing. I mean, I'll talk in general terms again. I won't talk about a particular... No,
I would like us to focus on this one, because I was only in this house a couple of weeks, and that whole weekend I got the runaround. So, Pascal, I know you from a different... I would just rather get a specific answer and to that question. Who made that decision?
That decision is made by the officers on the ground when a vessel is landing. So it's based on a risk assessment, and there's a number of risk factors taken into account, right? But if I can take it up one level here, Senator, there's an obligation on the SFPA to conduct a number of inspections. It's 5% by number of landings, or 7.5% by volume of certain species that are being landed, including blue whiting as a pelagic species. So we're obliged to reach those benchmarks, but inside those benchmarks we have a risk rating for vessels. A decision will be made in relation to a particular vessel based on those risk factors.
But you know yourself, Pascal, you have the pier in Killybegs, you have pelagia landing down at one side, blue whiting. Why can the monitor's been done there? You have stuff for human consumption. Why can this ongoing, it's going on now 6 or 7 years, why can the factory monitor not be done for blue whiting? I mean, you know yourself, you were in the machine. The blue whiting is a soft fish, and if it get more handling, the quality's gone out of it. The factories can't sell it. But if it goes to the factory and is produced right up there, there's no problem. Why can the factory monitor not count here for blue whiting?
So, Senator, we have to be careful about identifying individual companies here, right? But not...
Sorry, Chairman, sorry. There are general questions. He's asking about a factory.
Chair, he named a company. He named a specific company there.
Well, we can erase that from it. A company.
Well, I apologise if I named a company. I didn't mean to. I'm sorry.
A company, Senator.
Yeah.
So, again, I'll answer it a bit more generally, Senator, but come back to me if I can be. I'll be more specific. Not every processor in Killybegs is availing of the derogation that's available under the control plan. You're obliged to inspect at least 5% by number of landings and 7.5% of volume of landings that are done under the control plan. So if a processor is working outside the control plan, any monitor that is done on them doesn't count towards the metrics that are required under the control plan. I don't know how clear or not that is, but it's very difficult to answer without going into the specifics, given that there's very few companies that are dealing with fish for fish meal, industrial fish only.
Yeah, but I'm talking about fish here for human consumption. I mean, you know the machine that's on the pier.
Yeah.
To handle, to put the blue whiting through that machine is causing undue stress to the fish, and it's taking down the quality. Why, on God's green earth, can we not be just pumped into the lorry, taken up to the factory, produced in the factory, and the weight's up there being done? You know, you're talking about jobs here. You're talking about quality. We seem to be going arseways about everything, to be honest. I mean, the quality of the fish is essential to sell, and if we don't have good quality fish, we can't sell it. So, I think, and we need to get this point cleared here today. Is this going to be ongoing as we move on? Are you still going to maintain the blue whiting is going to have to be monitored on the pier side?
So, Senator, the situation that you describe about weighing in the factory, right? Yeah. That happens in 19 out of 20 landings. So, for every 20 landings, 19 of them are weighed in the factory. 1 out of the 20 has to be supervised weighed by us. In the case of the supervised weighed landing, then the obligation is on the operator to dewater that fish. So they can dewater it as much or as little as they want to, but that obligation is on them, right? But it's 1 of 20. The other 19 are weighed in the factory. And the 1 in 20 is a requirement under Ireland's control plan. So the default, the level playing pitch for Europe, if you want to call it that, is that every fish should be weighed on the pier side. Ireland decided it was going to apply to the European Commission for a control plan, which gives us the derogation that allows 19 of the 20 to be weighed in the factories. 1 out of the 20 has to be weighed under supervision of the control authorities at the pier side.
But surely...
Sorry, Senator, I'll bring in Deputy Maxwell, and we'll have an opportunity, hopefully, for a second round. Deputy Maxwell.
Good afternoon, good morning, thanks for coming in. Look, I'm from an inland county, don't know much about the fishing, but I did visit Killybegs this summer, and what I have to say, it was a horror story when you see boats tied up and factories closed up. Now, what we've heard here today so far is as clear as mud, in my opinion. We were asked about a court case. We can't comment on that. The SFPA don't take the court case. The DPP take the case. But is it not right that the DPP will ask for the people who want for evidence that why we should take the case? So, you know, somewhere in the line, your body had to direct the DPP and say this case is worth taking. After, and I'm not going to go over Deputy McLaughlin, it was all about weighing, and the NSA come up and said there was no case to answer. So saying the DPP took the case is to me, they took the case, but they had to get direction from you. There's no two ways about it. The DPP in Dublin didn't sit and say we'll take this case, and then it proved after 10 years putting a family and a man through. Anyway,
So just, Deputy, if I can deal with that again in generalities. I mean, nobody directs the DPP, Deputy, as you're aware. So the process is the DPP get a file from us.
oh,
right?
yes. So in the file, you must have directed in the file that there was a case to be taken here.
It's not a direction, and nobody directs the DPP.
Right, okay, well, we'll move on. That's as clear. Okay. I was up on the scene, that machine that Deputy Manager Boyle said about, and I spoke to people who said that the blue whiting was put through and it's made into fish meal. You're saying 1 in 20 have to go through that machine. That's the law of the land. You know, I did visit, and I'll not name the factory in case it gets me into trouble. I visited a factory, and I have to say, the amount, and all you could say is security cameras that you have made them install and weighing. You wouldn't see it at Dublin Airport going through the security, more cameras and more security, in my opinion. And yet, what we're doing is we're emptying a box, fish into a box on the pier, and taking if it's mackerel and there's blue, whatever, you're guesstimating, you're asking a trawler owner to guesstimate what he has in his hold, is what I'm told, and out of that box then it's extrapolated, and if he's 10% over, he's in trouble. So, you know, the whole thing is, the other thing is, I read an article at the weekend, I think it was the weekend there, I don't know, well anyway, it was, I think a journalist wrote it, but it was about, he talked about the Marine Times industry newspaper, and he talked about Cormac Burke. Cormac Burke had said that the SFPA needs to be reduced in size and powers. He describes the relationship between the industry and the SFPA as toxic. It went on and on. Then it said Dominic Rihan, head of the Killybegs fishermen, suggests the SFPA displays a level of heavy-handedness at times. Vessels feel they're being targeted and victimised. And this is the point we want. For the most part, the participating Oireachtas members nodded along. So either the journalist made that quote or someone in your organisation gave him that quote. Well, if I'm here just nodding along, well, I don't think I am. But, you know, I take offence to that quote, nodding along. What we're hearing is that the biggest obstacle to the Irish fishing industry is the SFPA. That's what I've been told. Now, you're going to tell me you're not. But every fisherman, every processor, even people who are supplying services to the fishing industry who I met would tell you the SFPA. Now, from what I'm told is the amount of foreign boats that are even coming to land. Killybegs, state-of-the-art pier, you know how many millions was spent in piers there. There's a tower, like an aircraft control tower, which you all sit in, your staff sit in, watching the pier. No, they don't. Okay, who sits in that tower?
The Harbour Master.
The Harbour Master. Use of nothing in that tower. Okay, and where do you monitor all the cameras from in Killybegs?
Maybe I'll take the questions in the order.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to know, I'll keep it on, where do you monitor the cameras that I seen in that factory are a live feed back to the SFPA. I'm told there's cameras on the pier. Where does your officer sit to monitor those cameras?
So they're in the ground floor of that same building.
Oh, so hold on, right. So they're not up on the top floor, they're on the ground floor, but they're in the building. Okay, right. So the Harbour Master sits at the top of the building.
Well, it's his office, yeah.
Yeah, but who owns the building?
The Minister for Agriculture.
Maybe for Agriculture. But you have a space in the building, and that's where all the live feeds go back into that building.
Well, if we could just deal with the live feeds, Deputy, because, I mean...
But where do they go into?
Yeah, they go into that building, yeah.
Right, deal with them then. What's
Okay,
the problem
okay.
if I'm asking you where they go into?
Well, I guess the first issue that I have, Deputy, is the way that, not just you, but how this is presented in that the narrative is that the SFPA make the processors install those cameras. That's actually not the case at all, Deputy.
Okay.
So I mentioned the derogation that's available to Ireland to move from weighing on the pier side to weighing after transport in the processing plants.
Okay.
Right? So part of that derogation is that the operator has to be licensed to weigh in his facility, right?
Okay.
If the operator wishes to be licensed, the control plan sets out the conditions that have to be met for that licensing to happen, right? And one of those conditions is that they have to have CCTV installed in certain areas of the processing plant. It's up to the processor as to whether they want to avail of the control plan or not. What happens is the processor installs those CCTVs according to the control plan, comes to us and said, I'm ready to apply for my licence now.
Right. Well,
And
that,
if we're satisfied with it, then we'll permit that
Okay.
operator to wade 19 out of 20 landings at their premises.
well, since we can't name any operators today, what I seen in that factory, that operator had all his cameras live feed in his factory at all the intakes. He even had 3 or 4 cameras on where a man had to work at the fish, looking at every angle. This person seemed to have everything in place. His factory was closed up for the last, this was back in June. Factory was closed up. There was no foreign ships coming in to land anything. He seemed to be abiding by the law, doing everything right, had invested a lot of money, and there he was sitting closed up. So why are the foreign,
Sorry, Deputy Mac,
ships...
just before you finish the question, I'm going to move to Deputy Whitmore before you begin a new question.
Why is the foreign ships not coming to Killybegs and
Sorry,
landing the fish?
Deputy
Thank
Mac,
you.
no, because there'll obviously have to be an opportunity to answer as well, and we're reading into another deputy's time. There will be a second opportunity. So, Deputy Whitmore.
Chair, sorry.
Would you mind? I do understand, but we're bound by the clock here to make sure that everybody has an opportunity. Sorry,
about talking
Mr.
to a
Hayes,
journalist.
you will have an opportunity to respond at the end. I'm sorry, but that's how we have to format this. And I have reminded members, and I'll do it again, to please allow sufficient time for the witnesses to answer your questions during your 7 minutes, because we do have to move on to allow everybody. But I will be sure to give SFPA witnesses the opportunity at the end of the meeting to respond to anything that they haven't had an opportunity to. Deputy Whitmore.
Okay, thank you very much. I suppose I'm just trying to take on board all these different conversations and the debate. I suppose just a point that you made, that the biggest problem for the Irish fishing industry is a lack of fish, and the sustainability of the sector. So I want to make that point. I'm just wondering, and if we could sort of go backwards and forwards, because I'm trying to get an understanding of how things happen. And how you monitor. So there would be a large number, I would imagine, of or of EU registered boats that fish in Irish waters that don't land. Do you have figures for that? What number of
The ones that fish and don't land?
and don't land, yeah.
Well, I don't, Deputy, but I guess just in relation to that, I mean, it's the flag state control authorities would have responsibility for the control of those vessels when they land in whatever port they land in. So the same way as Ireland, as a control authority, we have responsibility for the 2,000 Irish registered vessels, no matter where they fish. Control authorities in other member states would have a similar obligation.
And so then, I suppose I'm thinking particularly of the very large vessels, so super trawlers, factory ships, monster ships, however you want to call them. I mean, the capacity to catch a fish is enormous. I mean, I read somewhere that one of the boats had the capacity to hold essentially a third of the Irish quota on board its ship, one of the factory ships, right? So the potential for a boat of that size to, if it wasn't being monitored properly, to do damage to stocks is enormous, and I think we cannot underestimate it. So can you tell me then, when a EU registered boat of that size is in Irish waters and it's fishing, what monitoring of that boat happens?
So all our monitoring at sea on surface is done by the Naval Service. The Air Corps, we also have an agreement with the Air Corps in relation to monitoring. So Naval Service, Air Corps would generally be the at-sea control authority for us. But we also make use of EFCA, who have surface vessels and aircraft as well. And when they're operating in our zone, we make use of them as well.
Okay.
So generally the Navy, but sometimes EFCA.
But I suppose the reality is the Navy in Ireland is very limited. They really don't have the capacity to do a huge amount of monitoring. Is there an opportunity for yourselves to have onboard monitoring of those ships?
So,
like a voluntary, someone who stays on board and keeps an eye on what's happening?
Sure. So this is proposed under the incoming control regulation to be deployed on high-risk vessels in 2028.
Okay.
It's also going to be required by the Scottish authorities for pelagic vessels fishing in their area from 2027.
Okay.
And I mean, it is, there's nothing better than an on-board observer to be able to monitor what a vessel is doing. And the best type of onboard observer is obviously an electronic observer who doesn't have to sleep or eat or do anything else other than monitor what's going on. And it has been a proposal at EU level for a long number of years that this electronic monitoring would be introduced. Unfortunately, some member states, their industries have rejected and I guess stood in the way of the implementation of this. It is now in the incoming regulation, so it's going to be done. There was a pilot conducted 2 years to 18 months ago, which member states participated in. At the time, I wrote to all the producer organisations in Ireland asking them to volunteer vessels so that Ireland could have a say in the shape of how this REM would be carried out. Unfortunately, out of our 2,000 vessels, we got one volunteer.
Okay. Can you, so obviously we have a number of years before that's in place. Is there an opportunity, or I understand under regulations that you can ask for that ability to have onboard physical monitoring, observer on board? Is that something that's within the regulations that you can actually request of the EU?
So it really, that gets us more into the policy sphere than it does the control sphere.
So that would have to be a policy decision by government. Have you ever requested the department for that?
To put observers on board vessels?
To put observers on board?
Not that I'm aware of, that, but not in my time, certainly, anyway.
And do you not think that if we're looking at risk fisheries, that there's also at-risk vessels, right? That will be something that will be very useful and proactive for you to do, because we are hearing that a lot of Irish vessels feel that there's an overemphasis on Irish vessels versus EU vessels, and when you have a large EU vessel that can cause such enormous damage because of its size, even for that, to sort of demonstrate to the Irish industry that everyone has been held to account for what they do whilst they're out fishing, do you not think it would have been valuable for you to make that request and to actually try to get, have the discussion with the department so that you can actually put people on board these vessels? So while they're in our waters, there is a pair of eyes looking at what happens on that boat.
So in fact, Deputy, in relation to the inspections of Irish vessels versus EU vessels, I mean, the statistics don't back up whatever the narrative is in relation to that. And our statistics certainly would show that there's a higher rate of inspection on other member states and foreign vessels than Ireland. And I mean, I can give you the statistics, but Ireland's vessels 10%, other member states 57.14%, non-EU 13.16%.
I suppose even setting aside that argument though, so if we're just looking at the potential damage or impact that a large vessel like that could have on Irish waters, on Irish fisheries, do you not think that it's something that proactively you should have been raising with the Minister to seek that policy change? Because I think for me it would be very comforting to know that there was someone from your organisation on these boats to ensure that they were operating how they should be operating in Irish waters.
Yeah, again, Deputy, it moves into the policy sphere, but my understanding of it is that we could request observers on Irish boats. Other flag states would have to put their observers on their boats.
Okay. Would you raise that with the department?
I can, yeah. For Irish vessels, you mean, Deputy?
No, for EU vessels. Whether that's, because my understanding is actually that Irish observers could go on to those boats. And I think whilst there's an interim period, whilst the electronic monitoring is happening, I think that would be something as a very useful interim plan that's put in place so that we know what those boats are doing while they're in our waters.
Okay, Deputy.
Thank you.
Next we have Deputy Gallagher.
First and foremost, can I say that I'm somewhat familiar with all of this because I happen to be the one with authority back in 2024, 2026, when I realised the destruction that was being caused to the pelagic fish in particular when they were being weighed out of the freezing ice onto a weighing machine and into a tanker, and going into ambient temperature, and that was affecting the weighing. I invited Joe Borg, the Minister or the Commissioner at the time. He came, he saw the ludicrousness of what was happening. and resulted in the weighing in the factories. The weighing in the factories was a considerable cost to the processors, I think 2.4 million to provide the cameras. Could I ask one of the panel who supervised the installation of or if they supervised the installation of the cameras and also the location of the cameras? Did the SFPA indicate where the cameras should be so that we're fed back to the Harbour Master's office? When SFPA officials and officers can see this from the comfort of that building, far away from, I work myself in the factory in Killybegs, and know it's not that comfortable as it is in the Harbour Master's office. Could I also ask, when you people, the SFPA, advertise jobs, is there a competition for those jobs? Just that question will do me at the moment. Is there a competition?
Okay, thanks, Deputy. I presume, Deputy, you meant 2004 to 2006 when you were talking about the timescale there, rather than 2024 to 2026. Just when you were Minister of State for Fisheries is what you're talking about. So, absolutely. But then you went to Europe, Deputy, and in 2009 we had a new control regulation, and in 2011 we had a new implementing act. And it's under that current control regulation and that implementing act that the onus to weigh on landing or get a derogation comes in. And that's why Ireland has a control plan. The Minister of the day decided that Ireland would apply for a control plan, and that allows 19 of the 20 landings to be weighed in the factory, 1 to be weighed under supervision at the pier side. In relation to the installation of the cameras, no, we don't supervise the installation of the cameras, Deputy. So if a factory wants to apply to be permitted to weigh at their plant, they have to meet the criteria set out in the control plan. And then they apply for their permit, and then we'll inspect their premises to make sure the cameras are where they're obliged to be under the control plan. But we don't supervise the installation, no. Jobs, is there a competition? There's a competition for every job, Deputy. It would depend on the job as to who holds the competition. For example, the 2006 Act sets out that the competition for an authority member has to be held by public jobs. For roles at more junior levels, we might operate under a licence provided by public jobs to recruit ourselves through a recruitment agency. But it's a competition for every job, yeah.
Can I ask the question, when the executive chairperson was appointed to the SFPA, was there a competition at that time, or was it the minister's prerogative to appoint someone?
That's
yourself.
That's me, yeah. Yes, there was a competition conducted by public jobs, and then the legislation says that the minister makes the appointment. So when the public jobs process is finished, the candidate's name is given to the minister, and the minister makes the appointment.
Chairman, I'm aware of the 7.5% or 7.5%, but would it be the view of the executive of the SFPA that you're targeting vessels who have large quantities of fish rather than vessels who would have smaller quantities of fish?
So it'll be done on a risk basis, Deputy, right? But I mean, a vessel carrying a larger amount of fish, and you're probably talking about pelagic species here if you're talking about large vessels carrying larger amounts of fish.
Well, it's only pelagic that are weighed.
Well, it's not actually, Deputy.
They're weighed on the machine.
Right, in your case in Killybegs. But, I mean, if you're talking about larger vessels in the pelagic sector catching mackerel, herring, sprat, blue whiting, in large volumes, they're going to come higher on the risk rating in relation to the inspection regime, so they can certainly expect to be inspected more often than a 12-foot vessel that's operating out of a port in Mayo.
Would you accept that the weighing of blue whiting in particular results in those fish, as I said in Killybegs, going out the road, that it's not possible to process those for human consumption?
So more and more of those fish are being processed for human consumption. I think the figure is about 60-40 at the moment, Deputy. But just to be clear about it, the obligation to dewater and to weigh rests on the operator, not on the SFPA. When this was brought up in the past, Deputy, and there was a lot of grief about this 2 years ago, right? When this was brought up in the past, I asked BIM to get involved here and to help the sector in modifying or devising a machine that would be gentler on the fish during this process. And I understand that BIM were prepared to do that, but in any event, it didn't happen. But they were a very resourceful group of people, as you know, within the processing sector, and I'm sure they could come up with a way to do this operation of dewatering without damaging the fish, if that is what's happening at the moment. But that onus rests on the operator, Deputy.
What's the clock? One final question. Would you reconsider one of your previous answers when you say that you don't decide or the SFPA don't decide? Can I ask you, is it not true that the SFPA instructed the location of cameras and on occasions insisted on moving those cameras? You mightn't have that information now, but I'm asking you to reconsider your earlier reply.
So what will happen, Deputy, is the factory will apply for a permit. Our officers will go out and inspect, right? If the cameras aren't located where they need to be under the control plan, they will advise the operator that they can't be permitted unless the cameras are laid out according to the control plan. So there may have been a circumstance where one of our officers did that inspection. It's generally the fish processing areas that have to be covered by the cameras. They may have found that the camera wasn't covering the correct area, and they may have advised the operator that that camera needed to be moved. That's quite different.
That's not your earlier answer, and I leave it at that. It's not your earlier answer. And finally, let I say
we have
that
to move on to the next speaker.
BAM are not involved in any process, nor were they involved in any process.
Okay, I'll just move on to Senator O'Reilly.
Thank you. Thank you for coming in today. I'm going to pick up where Deputy Whitmore kind of left off. So what do you say to the accusation by some that your organisation is jeopardising the competitiveness of the Irish fishing sector, and that your organisation is biased against Irish fishing boats? And I'm going to, I know you responded to Deputy Whitmore's question by saying that the inspections were more on foreign vessels. But do your reports clearly show how many physical at-sea inspections are done on foreign vessels versus Irish vessels? And by that I mean real boardings, as opposed to administrative checking e-logbooks. And there is the argument with only 15% of fish caught in Irish waters by Irish vessels, yet the majority of inspections are targeted at Irish vessels. What do you say to that?
So, Senator, just you're zeroing in on inspections at sea here, but I mean most of the inspections that the SFPA conduct are on land. So it's the Naval Service or EFCA would conduct the at-sea inspections. But if you want the stats, particularly on at-sea inspections, I actually don't have them with me here, but we can certainly provide those, right? But
you gather that information and collate it, do you?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, when they're inspected by either the Naval Service or the Air Corps or EFCA or EFCA's air asset. We do have 2 rigid inflatable boats that we deploy for inshore inspections, but they wouldn't go more than a couple of miles offshore. But other than that, all the at-sea inspections are carried out under Memorandum of Understanding.
And what's the ratio, do you know?
Ratio between?
Foreign vessels and Irish vessels.
I just have the inspection figures on landing is what I have, Senator, if that's of use to you. But I can send on the at-sea inspections. But it would be a similar ratio, I'd imagine.
Okay, and I'm going to go back.
Again, sorry, Senator, they'd be carried out on a risk basis, so the risk factors should be similar. So I'd be very surprised if they weren't on a similar ratio.
I'm going to go back to the case, the long-running case that was adjudicated on this year. and of the fish exporter, the fact that it collapsed due to total lack of evidence, would you say that this has damaged trust within with the fishermen and within the fishing communities? And I know you did say that you don't bring cases, that is the DPP. However, the SFPA do provide the evidence. So would you say that you brought a case, or that cases are being brought with insufficient evidence?
So again, I can't comment on a specific case, Senator, but what I'd say is that...
I didn't say a specific case.
Sorry, I understood at the start of your statement that you were referring to a specific case, my mistake. But what I would say, Senator, is like what we do is we implement the regulations. Anybody that's compliant with the regulations has nothing whatsoever to fear from the SFPA. If somebody is breaching the regulations, then there's an obligation on the SFPA to follow that up.
And what is the ratio to cases collapsing that are being brought forward? The cases that are being brought forward, what is the percentage of cases that are collapsing?
So, Senator, I mean, the final step in any case is an adjudication by the court, right? So, I mean, the court may find for or against, but is that what you're calling a collapse?
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't have those figures. No, sorry, Senator, I don't have those figures with me. But I mean, the judge or the jury, whichever is the case, is the final determination of whether somebody has breached a regulation or not. So, I mean, that's the decision that's made on the day in the court.
Finally, Ireland is renowned for strong food safety standards, as you said in your statement earlier, but has now been banned from exporting salmon and spiny lobster to the US due to regulatory deficiencies attributed to the SFPA oversight. How does the authority explain the failure to meet comparability standards with the US? If we look at a similar issue with Irish brown crab a few years back, it would seem that the SFPA dropped the ball there while the department essentially left it in your hands. The French government overcame the issue in 8 months, while our fishermen were left for around 2 years in a precarious position. Will that be the case?
So, do you want me to deal with the salmon to the USA or the brown crab to China?
The salmon to the USA.
Okay. So, what you read there, Senator, is totally inaccurate. It was nothing whatsoever to do with the SFPA. The SFPA were notified of this issue 3 weeks ago. We sent an information notice to our customers who would be possibly exporters of salmon and spiny lobster, known as crayfish in Ireland, to the USA. But the issue was identified by NOAA, the American authorities, by virtue of cross-checks that they were doing with Irish legislation. They picked up something in the Wildlife Act 1972, I think it was, that wasn't consistent with their standards, and they stopped the importation of aquaculture salmon produced in Ireland from the 1st of January 2026 and spiny lobster or crayfish. So it was nothing to do with the health certificates or the export regime that the SFPA oversees to any third country.
And finally, we've had organisations in here, and many of them would be all on the same page, and they would be all saying the same thing, that they feel that there is a disproportionate and an overreach within your organisation. What do you say to that?
I guess it's a matter of opinion, Senator. I mean, I certainly wouldn't agree with that. From my seat, we're implementing the regulations that the EU Parliament has put in place and the legislation that these houses have put in place.
And would you say then that regulations can be interpreted differently?
In the main, the fisheries regulations are so detailed that they're quite easy to interpret.
Thank you, Senator. I'll move to Deputy Cahill.
Just in regards to this meeting today, I understand what you've said there, Mr. Hayes. You know, when I understood that the Sea Fisheries Protection Authority were coming in, you know, and the case has already been referenced, and I did listen to your reply, and you know, if we can't ask questions in here about a case that was in the public arena quite recently, you know, where are we going? I'm a new member like others in this committee, and look, if rules and laws of the House have to be changed, then we need to prioritise that. But just to generalise, a case that went on 10 years and the judge decided that there was a total lack of evidence, that's shocking. It really is. I read the case. I followed the case because I was aware you were coming in this morning. Can I ask a question that you may be able to answer? But to date, have you a figure for the legal costs? And I fully understand that the case could well be appealed, and I appreciate that, but have we any idea of the legal costs to date, especially the fact that it has gone on for so long? Deputy Whitmer raised factory ships, and I've seen factory ships, not up close now, but in the distance, and they do look like very large towns or small cities, and they are raping our waters. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And following on from the discussion earlier, we should be doing everything humanly possible to ensure that there are on board electric monitoring, and if nothing else comes out of today's meeting, we should be contacting directly the Minister and indeed the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach in regards to this, and as a collective group to push that through ASAP. We do really need to do something in regards to getting answers to questions. If we, members of the Oireachtas, cannot ask questions or indeed get answers, then there's a problem. And I'm repeating what I said earlier, that we need to address that, and we need to do it rather quickly, because there's going to be other groups coming in here, and we don't want to repeat again of what has happened and transpired this morning. Thank you.
If I can just say, Deputy, that's a specific section in the 2006 Act that refers to my attendance at an Oireachtas committee. Sorry, the authority's attendance at an Oireachtas committee. Your question in relation to the cost of a particular case, Deputy, I'll answer it in general terms again. In situations where the DPP takes a prosecution, then the DPP pays any costs involved with it. So you'd have to raise that question. You'd have to raise any question in relation to the cost of prosecutions, be it fisheries or otherwise, with the office of the DPP rather than with me.
We can't get answers, obviously.
Okay, rescind that section of the Act.
Okay, so I'll move on to Deputy Ward.
I want to thank you all for coming in today. So I'm going to be brief because we've got a number of questions, but I'm going to start with a quote. And the quote is this, and this is how the Irish fisherman actually feels about your organisation. I would say the majority of them I've spoken to. He who stops being better stops being good. And that quote comes from Oliver Cromwell. And that's how the Irish fisherman feels, that he stops being better, he stops being good, that he's absolutely strangling them. And I'll just state this now when I'm here. We're on about evidence-based. You provide the evidence. You still provide the evidence, okay? And they're absolutely pinned to the collar, particularly in Donegal and Castletownbere. All these fishing communities are held to ransom while Norway and the Faroe Islands get to do whatever they want, basically get to do whatever they want. So I'm going to go on my questions because I'm conscious of the time. And is it currently possible for a fisher who receives an administrative or criminal sanction for the same offence? Why is this rationable? So basically, that's what the question is.
So I presume that's speaking to the criminal case and the points case that might be possible. I mean, yes, it is possible for them to do it. As to why it's possible, that's a policy matter that you need to ask the Minister rather than ask me.
Right.
But what the legislation says is that they're separate tracks. If somebody commits a serious infringement, then they're liable to go each route.
Okay. Now, I know there's calls for the SFPA to be reformed and accountable to the Minister and this committee. Is it correct that the authority is currently not accountable to anyone? And has there been any attempts to reform the SFPA in recent years?
Yeah, I guess, Deputy, what's interesting here is that before my time in the SFPA, the second last time that the SFPA were here, I watched it online, and the criticism was that the SFPA weren't fit for purpose and were asleep at the wheel in relation to the activities of the fishing sector. And there certainly at that stage, and still seems to be, an attitude within the fishing sector that unless somebody's caught breaking a regulation red-handed, then they're not breaking it at all. I mean, that's not the case. The regulations are there. Whether we catch somebody red-handed or not, if they're breaking a regulation, they're breaking a regulation. But what's ironic then, Deputy, is that we're here today and the fishing sector are complaining to you and to others that we're now too fit for purpose and that we're overzealous in the way we're approaching our work. But the bottom line here, Deputy, is that what we're doing is implementing what's in the legislation of these houses and the regulations of the EU.
So you blame government policy?
I'm saying we're implementing the regulations that are made at EU level, and we're implementing the legislation of these houses.
Okay.
We're the problem.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, I'm just going to go on. What's going to change for you and for Irish fisheries in January 2026 when the latest EU rules come into force?
So there's actually little enough going to happen in 2026. They're going to come in over a phase period, but I'll let my colleague outline what's actually going to happen from the 1st of January 26.
Very good, thanks very much. I might just take you back a little bit in the sense that, since 2024, some of the regulations have started to be implemented. For example, we say AIS, all the vessels have to have AIS, they can't run it off now. If they do, they have to notify us. FMCs have to be 24-hour fishing monitoring centres. Now, again, we were ahead of the game in that we have that here in Ireland. And there was changes in regulations in relation to margin and tolerance. They came in 2024. This year, coming in, 2026, we'll have changes in relation to VMS for the 12-15 metre length vessels. Again, Ireland are ahead of the curve here, and already we have our vessels with the VMS and ERS, so it won't be any significant change for us. There will be changes in relation to harmonisation of points in serious infringements. There will be some changes in relation to recreational fishers, fishing without a vessel, etc., and recording of catch and effort. Transport documents will be another section that's coming in 2026, plus some changes also in relation to sales notes and takeover declarations, where if an operator had a turnover of less than 200,000, they didn't have to submit sales notes within the 24-48-hour period, so that's changed. Also some changes in relation to the logbook for the over 12-metre vessels. They'll have to record on a haul-by-haul basis, which will be new for them, that's coming in 2026, and also be requirements in relation to lost gear and recording of sensitive species that are which they capture, which they have to record that in the logbook. Other aspects of coming in will be supposed in relation to us sending data to the Commission and making sure that data is up to date. The whole area of risk is being looked at, and across the European Commission, EFCA have a large role in relation to that, so that we have a harmonised approach across all the member states. There'll be additional rules in relation to gear and marking of gear, but there will also be some exemptions for the smaller vessels up until 2030, so that will make them give them an opportunity to come into be compliant. For 2027, I suppose the ones that are going to probably impact us here would be the control regulations, the common controls we have with the other member states, and also in relation to weighing. They were due to come into 2026, but that stream now is back until 2027. So there's a working group looking at that.
When you say weighing, could you be more specific?
In relation to requirements, we'd say for vessel for weighing, sampling, there was already a working group looking at that at EU at EFCA level, we'd say, and I suppose it's a sensitive enough topic, and I think to get it right,
the Commission have said, okay, we need another a further bit of time to consider that and consider the work that's being done by EFCA on behalf of the Commission to look at it from a scientific basis, because there's a lot of conversation about that sampling regime and what's the best way of doing it. So that scientific study is taking place. So that's put back now till January 2027.
Okay, that's fine. Now, we're dealing with Norway and the Faroe Islands. Has there ever been any issues with them regarding cases that you've had to provide evidence for? Just a brief, anything?
Could you ask that question again?
Okay. Has there been any court cases where evidence has been provided where, let's say, a Norwegian ship or has come ashore?
Yeah, there is a process where we can transfer cases to other authorities.
And what's the outcome of them cases when this does happen? Is it similar years and years dragged out in court like happens here, or is it different?
Well, that's a question about the Irish judicial system, which isn't for me to answer.
Okay.
We'll move on to Deputy Cooney.
Thank you, Chairman. And again, look, I'd like to thank you for your opening statement. Just a couple of quick questions. First one is, have you had any instance where water quality from rivers and streams has a negative impact on aquaculture production sites? If so, how many, where, and is there information on the estimated financial impact of same?
So Deputy, we wouldn't particularly be monitoring water quality, which would be a matter for the EPA and maybe Inland Fisheries Ireland if it was in rivers or in inland waters. But what we do is we test aquaculture sites and we conduct sanitary surveys in aquaculture sites, particularly new aquaculture sites. And I mentioned in my opening statement about the type of sampling that we do to make sure that the consumer is protected in relation to shellfish. So, it wouldn't exactly be directly related to water quality, but obviously if there was some sort of toxins in the water or something that was detrimental to human health in an aquaculture site and it showed up in the testing, then we would be taking action in relation to that sort of issue.
And had that happened in any of those sites in the past?
Sites are regularly closed, Deputy, absolutely, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you don't have a serious concern that there would be any effect on the sites?
So the monitoring programme is ongoing. So they're monitored on a regular basis. They have to continue to pass those tests. And otherwise they're closed. If they're closed, they have to pass a series of tests again before they can be opened. I think it's 3 consecutive months to have to test above a certain level before they can be reopened for production then.
Okay,
and we also classify waters into different categories. So A, B and C would be the main categories. A product coming from waters classified as A can be put directly onto the market for human consumption. A product coming from the classification B has to be depurated first before being put on the market. So there is a series of steps to go through, all to protect the end consumer here.
Very good, and thank you for that knowledge. Second one is, can I ask if the SFPA has considered the use of unmanned airborne underwater or surface drones as a future component in supporting their role? For example, again, for effluent discharges, agricultural and fishery monitoring. I wonder, have you ever engaged with the Centre of Robotics and Intelligence Systems in University of Limerick, who are doing an awful lot of work in this line, in fairness, with regard to developing a pilot project that examines how these systems could deliver cost efficiency and reduce risk to service?
So, starting and working backwards, yes, we have spoken to them, Deputy, I guess in a sort of a fact-finding capacity, if I can call it that. Some of the functions that are performed on aquaculture sites, particularly finfish, are done by the Minister directly rather than by the SFPA. They use drones in relation to that work. We do have underwater UAVs which we use to ensure compliance with the control regulation in relation to what's under the waterline in a vessel, like discharge hatches or whatever. So we can use them in conducting inspections. But absolutely, it's an area that we're interested in exploring further.
And I presume you've said that you have been exploring with University of Limerick on this technology.
We did have a conversation with them, yeah. But obviously, before we'd move on to the next phase of something like that, we'd have to be conscious of public procurement and, you know, making sure that we're setting out exactly what we need and what we need it for. And it wouldn't be just the University of Limerick would be involved. It would be any operation, any company, any research facility that wanted to tender for the work done.
Very good. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. I have a number of questions myself, so I'll put them now before we begin a second round of questions. The first relates to at-sea vessel inspections, and I have to say I think it's quite astounding that you're at this committee without having the figures and the statistics for at-sea inspections of vessels in Irish waters. I actually can't understand why you wouldn't have those figures coming to this meeting. I'd like to one, maybe understand why you don't have those figures, if you can provide them to us, because I mean, this is a critical part of what we're discussing here today. I understand that there was 2,270 odd vessel inspections last year, and from a response to a previous question, that some 30% of those were of Irish vessels. Given that the vast bulk of fishing effort in Irish waters is carried out by non-Irish vessels, that seems like a huge, hugely out of step and out of kilter with the size of fishing effort. How are vessels chosen? How are vessels chosen? What is the nature of that risk assessment that is made before conducting an inspection of a vessel? And is it fair to say that if we are depending for the main part on inspections against the harbour wall or on land inspections rather than at sea, we're missing a trick? We're missing a certain proportion of vessels that are effectively fishing in our waters with a huge amount more quota than the Irish industry. Granted, that's not the SFPA's fault, but are subject to a much less stringent inspections regime, and in many cases can return to home ports loaded to the gunwales with fish and never be inspected, certainly not by the Irish authorities, if indeed by the authorities in their home countries.
Deputy, apologies for not having the at-sea inspections, but we can certainly provide it to the committee. I mean, it's information that we look at on a daily basis in any case, and we just don't have it to hand. As you can see, we've fairly large folder.
Can I just ask why? Is it an oversight? Is it a folder left on a desk? Or how do you not have that information?
No, as you can see, we've fairly large folders with us, Deputy, but it certainly would have been useful if maybe the committee had indicated beforehand the topics that they wanted to discuss.
Not to labour the point, but it's a fairly significant part of your work, I would imagine, in terms of sea fisheries inspection, and it's a significant topic that you should have anticipated will come up today. To be honest, I think it's a core piece of information that's missing from this discussion. Well, but again, look, we'll carry on. I accept that you don't have it to hand. You can't manufacture it here in front of us, so we'll carry on. But my other question is just in terms of how vessels are chosen and the risk factors, and your response in terms of vessels returning to their home ports.
Yeah, again, Deputy, apologies for that, but I do have a folder with 37 different tabs in it here, so we tried to anticipate what the committee might ask us. Obviously, we didn't speculate on the. Yeah, okay. So, Deputy, I think those figures you may have got them the opposite way around to what I read them out. So, if I just do, and I did read them pretty quickly. So for 2024, which are the and we're talking here about pelagic landings, which seems to be the main emphasis for today. So for 2024, the numbers inspected were, and these are landings inspections, obviously. So it was 10.27% of Irish vessels. It was 57.14% of other member states' vessels. And it was 13.16% of non-EU vessels. And again, that's just pelagic fisheries.
The remainder then, so that doesn't add up to 100%.
No, 57.14% of other member states' vessels. 13.16% of non-EU vessels. And again, that's just pelagic fisheries we're talking about. The remainder then, so that doesn't add up to 100%.
54, 13 and 10.
So, yeah.
That's that up to 70%. There's a in and around.
Are they percentages of each? So it's as in it's 57%.
Yes. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. That's it.
So, sorry, just clarify that, because I'm trying to understand how many out of the total quantum of on land inspections, because we don't have the figures for at sea. How many of them are Irish?
So maybe if I go to the number of landings in 2024, Irish vessels 331, other member states 7, and non-EU 38. So that's the number of landings.
So 331 Irish landings were inspected last year.
No, sorry, that was the landings in total. The number inspected in 2024, 34 Irish vessels were inspected.
34, okay.
4 other member state vessels were inspected.
Okay.
And 5 non-EU vessels were inspected.
Okay. So
it's the percentage of the total number of vessels.
So for every 34 Irish vessel inspected, or their catch inspected, only 5 non-Irish, so between EU and non-EU. If those are the figures, I mean, it's even more astounding than what I said in my opening question. It's a massively out of kilter with the nature of fishing effort in Irish waters, where only 15% of total allowable catch is actually caught by Irish vessels, or Irish vessels only have that quota, yet the absolute vast bulk of inspections on land, and I would imagine perhaps it is a similar ratio at sea, is the SFPA's efforts are overwhelmingly directed at Irish vessels.
I don't agree. Look at these figures, Deputy. So 331 Irish vessels landed, 34 were inspected. 7 other member state vessels landed, 4 were inspected. 38 non-EU vessels landed.
Okay, and I think the point that I'm making, and I'll make it again, is vessels, we don't have statistics here at this committee meeting for at-sea inspections. We can't say, you can't tell me how many foreign EU and non-EU boats are being inspected at sea. I've made the point that vessels that are returning to their home ports, having caught fish in Irish waters, we have no oversight of that. So if there were only seven vessels landed last year in Irish ports, and you're inspecting 4 of those, I mean, how do we have any picture? How does SFPA, how can you give us any assurance here that you're conducting any level of inspection or monitoring of fishing effort in Irish waters by EU or non-EU boats?
So, Deputy, I guess the way I'd answer that is by saying it's a common fisheries policy, right? So the obligation doesn't fall only on Ireland's control authorities in relation to other member states fishing in the Irish EEZ. It falls on the control authorities of those member states as well. So, I mean, it is the member states working together at an EU level in relation to control of vessels fishing in union waters, as the EU call it.
Okay, and very briefly, because I won't have an opportunity to come in for the second round, I just want to put a question to you with regard to cases. And while I know you're not going to respond, and at some point in the future, maybe when we know that an appeal isn't going to be taken, because I think that would be a colossal waste of money, we might actually speak about an individual case. But in the general sense, has there been any review by SFPA on the cases that have been brought, or files that have been presented to DPP, who then make their decision whether to bring a case or not? A review of how many files have been prepared, and you might have figures for how many files. Also, how many of those have resulted in a conviction, and how many have been dismissed? And if there's any plans to do a review on cases that have been effectively thrown out, because there is a difference between somebody not being convicted and a case being thrown out by the judge. I think we can all understand that. We don't have to be lawyers. That when a judge said there's a total lack of evidence and we're dismissing it summarily rather than going to a jury. Has there been any review? Is there a review? Have you plans to review that?
So we review that on an ongoing basis, Deputy. I mean, that would be the work of one of our units effectively. We have a system that keeps track of all this. So rather than giving you figures, some of which I'd have in front of me, I'd prefer to send on to the committee what you've requested there.
Yeah, I'd ask you to send those on. And in terms of the review being carried out on an ongoing basis, to whom is that reported? How often?
it's reported to the authority.
Okay, and from the authorities reported to any other agency of state, to your line department, to the minister?
Yeah.
And could that report, maybe on an annual basis, be furnished to this committee as well?
So some of the criteria that you outlined would be reported on. Some of them would be included in our annual report, which is obviously publicly available. Some of them would be reported to the minister, to his officials, without going into the individual cases, obviously.
And is there any place where we could see the sum and the sum and the sum all together in the one document? Is that something that you could prepare for us?
We'll check exactly
yeah.
if what you've asked for is in our annual report.
Okay.
If it is, we'll link it to it. If it's not, we'll provide it.
I don't think the full detail is it, because, I mean, the question has been asked several times here about cost, because whereas we appreciate that the legal cost of bringing the case, that's a matter for the DPP, but the case of preparing a file that for whatever happens in front of the judge, a judge says, well, there's no evidence, absolutely no evidence here. You know, I mean, I think from an accountability and transparency point of view, I think the public, and there's a public interest in this, that money isn't being wasted, notwithstanding the fact that the effort and the stress and the hardship that's caused to somebody having to deal with that. So look, I'll leave it at that, and we'll go to a second round.
Deputy, I can assure you that the legal costs and every penny we spend is accounted for in our annual report and our annual accounts.
I'm talking about the cost to SFPA and the public purse of preparing files that then go to the DPP that are effectively thrown out of court for, I think, to quote the judge, a total lack of evidence. So that was the question.
And just so that we're clear, Deputy, I mean, I've said we'll provide statistics, but that's a difficult statistic to provide unless there's a really good definition of what thrown out means. Okay,
well, I suppose I'll hazard a definition. It's where the case is dismissed by the judge summarily. So I have Deputy McLaughlin. We'll take a second round. We're up on time, so I'd say we'd be sticking to 3 minutes, if that's okay. Deputy McLaughlin, and then I have Deputy Whitmore, and have a couple other speakers. I'll come to you all.
Okay, thank you very much, Cahirla. Mr. Hayes, can you just read out the part of the legislation that prevents you from commenting on court cases? Just read that out, please, for the committee's benefit.
So will I read the full section?
Yes, I just read out what you read out earlier on again, please.
So it's section 68 of the Act. And what it says is, in carrying out its duties under this section, the authority shall not, and this section relates to attendance at an Oireachtas committee, A, question or express an opinion on the merits of any policy of the government or a minister of the government, or on the merits of the objectives of such a policy. B, provide information that might facilitate the commission of an offence, prejudice a criminal investigation, or jeopardise the safety of any person. Or C, be required to account to a committee for any matter which is or has been or may at a future time be the subject of proceedings before a court or tribunal in the state.
How do you feel about reading that out? And I'm going through your website here. I'm reading statement after statement after statement issued by the SFPA following court cases that you've been successful in, but I can't find any statement from you about court cases that you haven't been successful in. How do you feel about that?
So maybe I should have read the start of the paragraph here.
No, you don't need to read anything to me.
Because
what you're doing is using a part of legislation today. So you're referring to legislation so you don't have to comment on a court case that is shocking, frankly, in what is in the public domain, that has been reported in the public domain. You're refusing to comment on it. Yet I find statement after statement after statement, you cannot be silenced when you win court cases in commenting on what's happened and commending your officers. Yet in this court case, an officer of the SFPA apparently tampered with evidence according to the evidence of the NSAI. The NSAI found no wrongdoing, but found that one of your officers apparently led to a wrong finding by leaning a spanner on the weighing scale. And you have no comment to make on that. But yet I see comment after comment after comment on your website about court cases you're successful in. So is it the case that you remain silent when a court case doesn't work out, but you have a lot to say when court cases do work in your favour. And what message does that send to the industry that you don't learn from mistakes? In this case, I mean, it's just shocking that that case went on for 10 years. I certainly, and I would imagine other members of this committee, will note your refusal to comment on it today, and will be looking for a lot more from the Minister in relation to legislation and learning from all of this. I'm going to leave it at that. I actually don't want you to respond, but I have found statement after statement after statement where you're immediately commenting when it's damaging to the industry. But when it's damaging to the SFPA, you haven't a single word to say. You were given a chance in this committee and you hadn't a single word to say, and you hid behind a legislative technicality in order to do so. And that will be noted by this committee and by the industry.
Deputy Whitmore.
Thank you very much. I just want to briefly touch on the sprat fishery. Obviously, there's been a change in the rules and that there was a quota in place for over 18-metre vessels for this year, which will now be no longer allowable. But there's no quota for under 18 vessels. Now, the 2,000-tonne quota was very quickly met once the fishery began. Do you know what landings for sprat for under 18-metre vessels have occurred this season?
We wouldn't have. Sorry, Deputy, we wouldn't have the figures available yet, but we can have them later in the year, and certainly we can send them on to you.
Okay. When do you think it will be? When would you normally? I mean, the fisheries.
Well, the figures that we publish would probably be about June, but we can see if we can get something before that for you, Deputy.
Okay, perfect. That would be very
Sorry,
useful.
that would be June 26 for the calendar year 25 is what I'm saying here.
Yeah, no, that's, if you could get them earlier, that would be very useful. I'm just wondering, can you just go through the process of how you quantify those landings?
So the vessel is obliged to keep a logbook if it's over a certain size. So that logbook may be electronic or it may be paper. So in the case of the electronic logbook, the data is returned automatically to us. In the case of the paper logbook, it's handed into our office periodically and it's entered manually. And then that is combined together to get a total landing, and obviously it can be interrogated for landing by vessel size, by port, by whatever way you want to slice and dice.
And the people on site, though, at the ports would select a certain number of boats and they would cross-check.
The system will automatically carry out cross-checks in certain circumstances, and it'll flag it up to our officers if there's something to be followed up there.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you. If you could get those stats to me, that would be very useful. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to follow on from the case made by Deputy McLaughlin, and all I can say is in his accusation that there's a lack of consistency when you apply Section 68, depending on the result of the case. And I'll leave it at that. That it's wrong that you can respond to cases that are favourable to you, and then you put the shutters up when it comes to 68. But that's something we'll pursue further. And in addition to that, I'm sure, and this is just a statement, that the DPP are totally embarrassed as a result of this, at the evidence which is supplied. They're only as strong as the evidence that you supplied to them. And it'd be much better to come in today and put your hands up and say, we got it wrong. We got it wrong, and we apologise to the DPP, not to us, not to the fishermen, but to the DPP for the lack of evidence which was produced. I mean, harassment for 10 years. I mean, there's no comeback for that company. No comeback whatsoever. But I would hope that you may change your ways as a result of this and be consistent. You referred, Mr. Hayes, to the common fisheries policy. All the regulations are common, but it's strange that you people implement them differently. And I would suggest if your people haven't been to other countries that you should go there. Now that this case hasn't cost you anything, go there and see how they're implemented there. But they seem to be implemented more vigorously in this country than there are in the other countries. And can you tell me that was this case cost neutral to you? All of the expenses from the investigations, all the preparatory, was that all a matter for the DPP? So it did not cost you anything. And finally, bring it back to a question that was raised by Senator O'Reilly in relation to the salmon. NOAA confirmed that based on the written responses from Ireland, it led them to banning salmon and crayfish, and that report was out last week. So did you people respond to the queries, and why is it that they're banned now? But they're blaming the responses from the Irish authorities for this.
Thanks, Deputy. Just to be clear, Section 68 does not prevent the SFPA from issuing press releases. Section 68 refers specifically to our appearance at an Oireachtas committee, specifically. And it's not that I'm choosing not to answer the questions, Deputy. I'm legally prohibited from answering the questions. So I just want to make that clear.
Will you issue a press release dealing with these matters then? Yeah. Will you make a public statement dealing with these matters?
No, I won't, Deputy, and there's other reasons besides Section 68 here. We're still not past the time for appeals. It's a matter for the DPP as to whether it is appealed or not. I've nothing to do with that decision. But as far as I'm concerned, it's still sub judice in that regard in any case. But to say that I'm putting out press releases about successful cases and refusing to speak about this isn't accurate. Section 68 prohibits me at this committee.
Have you released a statement following unsuccessful cases? Have you released a public statement following an unsuccessful court case?
I can't remember putting one out, Deputy, to be quite honest about it. But I guess the reason that we put out press releases in the first place of this type is so that we can promote compliance across the sector. It's not with a view to beating anybody that has been convicted in a court over the head with a stick. It's so that we can get the message of compliance out there and try and get the sector to be compliant. We'd much prefer if we weren't in a situation where anybody was breaching regulations.
Thanks, Mr. Hayes. Senator Boyle.
Sorry, Chair, can I just answer in relation to the salmon?
There'll be an opportunity at the end. We just try to get through all the members first. Senator Boyle.
Just on what's going on here, like there was a criminal case taken against a young skipper who I know personally, and the pressure that put on to that man and his family, you know, just because it was alleged that he underdeclared his bycatch. I mean, and thankfully the jury and the judge threw it out of court too. I mean, it's mind-boggling what's going on here, the pressure that's put on families. You know, it really is. That poor man didn't know if he'd be fit to go to America or anything again after it. So I know we're not going to get an answer, so I'll just I'll throw a question, maybe we'll get an answer to what progress has the SFPA made logging the application to the EU Commission on the port landing for killibegs under the new regulations?
So this is for designation as a port under the margin of tolerance regulation, I assume you're asking about, Senator. Well, look, first of all, as to whether an application is made in respect of killibegs or not is a policy decision that rests with the Minister. So as far as I'm aware, the Minister hasn't decided yet as to whether an application is going to be put in or not. When the Minister makes that decision, and if it's in the affirmative that he is going to apply, then it's quite likely that he'll ask the SFPA to put the application in, but he may choose another route. He may ask his own officials to do it instead. But in anticipation that that may happen, the SFPA have started carrying out an assessment of what would be required in killibegs to support such an application. And that assessment is pretty well advanced at this point in time.
And how long do you think, if it was kicked, how long will it take? I mean, Denmark and Latvia have already received theirs.
Yeah, my understanding is that they got theirs back in a matter of a few months.
Right. And just another question here. What agent is responsible for vessels from third countries and EU, such as large Norwegian fleet operating in our waters every spring?
So the risk assessment is done on a number of different levels, and generally speaking, it will be on a fishery level, on a vessel level, and on a stock level. The start of the process is normally initiated by EFCA. And then it can be added to along the way. So is it in EU waters or is it outside?
Waters.
Yeah. So obviously it's NIAFC outside it, which is the Northeast Atlantic Fisheries Convention, and they're responsible for what applies out there. When we move into the EEZ, and as the Commission call it, EU waters up to our 12-mile limit, then the risk assessment would be initiated by EFCA, and we would be involved in that process. It happens on an annual basis, and certain segments would be identified as high, medium, low risk, certain fisheries similar, and certain vessels. It's actually published on our website, Senator,
right?
Other than the vessel risk rating,
right,
which isn't published.
Right, so so we're right in saying that yours would have a good input onto that?
We'd have as much input as other member states would have, Senator.
Thanks, Senator. Deputy Maxwell.
Yeah, just to finish up, I found the morning highly frustrating. And you can see where fishermen would have the angst they have against the SFPA. The line when questions were asked, the rules that our predecessors made was used against us to not answer questions. A silo was put up. If you were leaving this, you would think that the fishing industry is in absolutely rosy, going really well, and the SFPA are there to be thanked for doing it. You know, like we see just the amount of, and there's something, Chair, we have to look at and go back to our rules that that people can come into this committee and use our own rules against us to not answer a question when it's put to them. It's not, you know, it's not what we're here for. I look forward to having you back again. I don't, from what I take, you haven't been here in a long time. At our Oireachtas committee, maybe you have, and you know, like, I suppose the one thing I take, I asked you about the live feed into the tower, and you said no, and then you said, oh well, we're not on the top floor, it's owned by the harbour, but we're in the bottom floor. That sums up the level of answers we were getting here, and I can understand why Irish fishermen feel the way they do about the SFPA leaving this meeting today.
Deputy, I mean, the tower is a very specific location to mention.
It is.
It's important to be accurate when you're sitting in front of a committee.
And I asked you, where did your live feed go? Did it go into the top of the tower? You said no. And I made a mistake. It wasn't the top of the tower. It was on the first floor, the rung floor. But that was the level of the way you wanted to take the question. Said, yeah, because in the tower, but we're not on the top, we're on the bottom. That's fair enough. If that's the angle you want to take, Mr. Hayes, no problem. I can understand then, if you're saying that to me here, you've never met me before, how you're dealing with the fishermen on the pier in Killybegs or Castletown Bear or anywhere. That's where that disconnect has come from. That's what I'm taking from the meeting. And that's just one point. Other people asked you questions and there was a total disconnect, like it didn't. So that's all I can take. Thank you.
And I mean, Deputy, like, it has to be said here, I mean, I can understand the frustration, right? But I mean, that frustration has been taken out on me for complying with the legislation of this House.
Yeah, and yes, and I didn't know that legislation was there. Maybe that's on me. I should have read up the Act and known that before any question was asked. But anyway, that's it. We have to look at ourselves to see how we can go forward to better when we have someone before this committee that we can ask them the questions and try and get the answers that, you know, we want.
And Deputy, I mean, certainly I look forward to coming back anytime you want to see me.
Thank you.
I'm happy to come back here.
Thanks. Thank you. Senator O'Reilly.
Yeah, I just want to kind of reaffirm what Senator Boyle was saying earlier, just about the heavy-handedness and the disproportionate responses. And there was a recent case as well of a man in his 60s who had changed an outboard motor for another and was waiting for his licence renewal. And he was hit with not just one but 14 summonses from the DPP. And there's also another case last year where 30 armed response officers landed into a man's yard. Like, that's extreme, that's excessive, and that has a profound effect on people and their families. And just to go back, I'm still waiting for a response on who is responsible for resolving the compliance issue now on the salmon and the spiny lobster exports. Who is responsible?
Thanks, Senator, and I'm glad you asked me that because that's the one I wanted to come back on a while ago. So, Senator, we only heard about this issue with the crayfish and the salmon 3 weeks ago. We are certainly not, Deputy Gallagher, we are not the one that was in contact with the US authorities on anything to do with this. We sent out an information notice because there was a risk of people exporting fish to the US that was going to be turned back. So we're the ones that were delivering the message. We weren't involved in any of the discussions related to this. The information that I gave on this earlier is as much information as is available to me at this point in time. Sorry, Senator, my understanding is that it is the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine is speaking with the US authorities.
And who do you report to? Who do you report to?
Who does the authority report to?
No, who do you, as the chair of the organisation, who do you report to? Who are you accountable to?
We report to this committee.
Thank you.
Deputy Cahill.
Just on the East Coast mussel seed fishery, and I know there was delays for specific reasons. Is there any further update? It's only that it was supposed to open a number of months ago, and I know that there was plenty of seed there at the time. The likelihood is that it's gone now by, you know, crab and starfish, etc. And it's getting very late for, you know, trawlers to be going out and gathering it, etc. Is there any update on that?
So that would be a question for the Minister rather than the SFPA, Deputy. So the Minister deals with opening and closing fisheries. He'll normally put out some sort of statutory instrument or a notice of some sort, and then it becomes the SFPA's duty to make sure that that notice is complied with. But the opening of fishery is a question for the Minister.
I get proposals.
Yeah. Okay. I have two further indications, and I do want to give SFPA an opportunity to say a few words as well in closing. So I'll take Deputy McLaughlin and Deputy Gallagher, if that's okay, and then I'll hear your proposal. Just very briefly, we're talking 1 minute.
This will be a very brief question. So it's a question to Mr. Murphy, the Executive Manager, Legal Services there. Can you just clarify, are you conducting a review of existing cases? Are you going back over cases that have been, you know, are you conducting a review of cases and making recommendations to the DPP? And would you say that under your oversight there's been a change in the policy in terms of how you deal with legal cases, what cases find their way to courts, what cases you would negotiate a settlement under your management? Could you just make a wee brief statement on that, please?
Certainly. Thank you, Deputy. Thank you, Deputy. In relation to reviews, we review all cases on an ongoing basis. They progress through the courts, so we have opportunities to review files at all times. In terms of the, that's the extent of the review process that we undertake. We have always complied with our enforcement policy that has been in place before my tenure, and that policy reflects that that any enforcement action is proportionate, that not every infringement will result in a prosecution, and that is set out in the enforcement policy. So there hasn't been a change in policy. We avail of the tools which are provided for under the Act and under legislation, and a file is prepared for the DPP, and then, as has been outlined, the DPP makes a decision on whether or not to proceed to a prosecution.
Thanks, Mr. Murphy. Deputy Gallagher, 1 minute.
I think I speak on behalf of all when I feel that the length of time we had today wasn't adequate, and this should happen at an early date. And I'm thinking in particular of the small vessels that can only land at designated piers because sea fisheries officers are not available. I think we must put the the fishermen before fishery officers, and I think when they know that there's a 4-hour hail in to small ports, that you could be available. But it's for another day. I don't want the answer now, but I want the SFPA to be reasonable in that respect.
Thanks, Deputy Gallagher. And I'm conscious that time was tight. We had a lot of questions, so I propose to give maybe 3 minutes just to wrap up any loose ends to the SFPA. If you'd like, Mr. Hayes, any questions you didn't get a chance to answer, if there's anything you'd like to say in closing.
Thanks, Cathaoirleach. Look, I guess one that's sticking out at me is in relation to whether we prompted, I forget who asked it, whether we prompted a journalist. I think it might have been Deputy Gallagher asked it, was it?
Deputy Maxwell.
Deputy Maxwell. And I can assure you that that wasn't the case, Deputy, as much as I can be sure that nobody in the organisation spoke on those sort of terms to that journalist. Certainly, I can assure you that there was no discussion by me in relation to anything that had happened at a previous Oireachtas committee hearing.
Thank you for the clarification.
Thanks, Chair. Look, I didn't prepare a closing statement because I didn't know what you wanted.
To give you an opportunity if there are outstanding matters just like that.
I'm happy to come back here at any stage, Cathaoirleach. I guess what I'd like to underscore again, because I can feel the frustration in the room in relation to not commenting on a particular case. If I commented on that case, then I'd be breaking the law as it stands at the moment. You're the legislators. I mean, if you're that frustrated about it, I mean, it's within your hands to do something about that. If the legislation has changed, I'd be more than happy to come back and talk about individual cases, obviously within the other parameters that I'm allowed to do that. But look, let me just say again, thanks very much to the committee for the opportunity to come here and to tell the other side of the story, because some of the sessions that I've been listening to up until now, I would certainly be of the view that a full picture wasn't presented to you. So at least now, bad and all as you might think it is, you have the other side of the story to consider now. I'll stress again that we're not a policy organisation. We're not in a position to put legislation forward. We're a creature of legislation. We do whatever is in the legislation and the regulation. We have a good working relationship with the fisheries sector. And as I said earlier, anybody that's complying with the regulations, that's complying with the law of the land, has nothing whatsoever to fear from anybody within the SFPA. Thanks very much, Chairman.
Thank you. Very briefly, Deputy Ward.
Briefly, I want to second Pat's motion of inviting you back, but I'd also like the Minister to be involved in this, because I believe there's a complete miscommunication going on here, and it's very important that we have the Minister here. So if you'd be willing to come back when the Minister's here, we'd greatly appreciate it.
Thank you. And Deputy Ward, just to close the meeting, to thank you for being here, and I'm glad that you can sense the frustration, because it's real, and I think it sums up the frustration amongst the industry and amongst coastal communities. I mentioned already that Deputy Gallagher has been appointed by this committee to compile a report, committee report into the whole. Sorry, Deputy McLaughlin. Into sea fisheries protection issues more broadly, and that will be examining the differences, the very sharp differences between the regime here in Ireland and in other European countries. I think that the proposal from Deputy Ward is a really good one, that we would have SFPA back in here on a regular basis. I think there's a new committee, an active committee. We have a lot of work to do on maybe several times a year, but certainly early next year, and that we would invite the Minister, because as you say, you're an enforcement agency, not a policy one, but I think it would be important to get the policy setter and the enforcement agency together in the one meeting. And I note, Mr. Hayes, that the SFPA is answerable to this committee, and I think that is really healthy and a healthy feature of our democracy. So I would ask you those pieces of information that have been requested. I'm sure you've taken a note, and minutes and transcript will be forthcoming. But that information that has been requested by myself and other members will be issued to us as soon as possible. And I would just like to reiterate my call that ongoing review into cases, that will be compiled, and the various pieces of information. I take the point that some is published in your annual report, but the full information would be perhaps put into a report that would be laid before this committee. I think that would be a really useful piece of work, and I'd certainly welcome it and ask you to do that. So with that said, Gurmil Magav, thank you very much for being here. Thanks to all our members for your questions, and we'll conclude the meeting at that point.